When I was just 11 years old, I lost my parents in a hiking accident. My parents were both avid hikers, passionate about the outdoors, and they frequently went on hiking and camping trips. These adventures were a regular part of their lives, something they loved and looked forward to. Whenever they planned one of these trips, my younger sister Karen and I would be dropped off at our grandmother's house. She would take care of us while our parents took some time off. It had become almost a routine. We'd spend the weekend with Grandma waiting for parents, and they'd return with stories of their latest adventure. But one day, something went terribly wrong. It was a rainy morning, the kind of day that would usually make hiking more challenging. The details were too much for me to fully grasp at the time, but what I learned was that my parents had an accident while hiking. They slipped and fell. Luckily someone spotted them and immediately called 911 for help. I still vividly remember the moment when my grandmother received the call. Her face drained of color, and she collapsed to the ground in shock. I didn't know what was happening at first. All I could see was the overwhelming grief in her eyes. She quickly gathered herself, and with a sense of urgency and dread, she rushed Karen and me to the hospital. Throughout the ride, my grandmother kept silently weeping, while holding on to me and Karen. When we arrived at the hospital, the news was devastating. My parents had been declared dead on arrival. I was too young to fully understand the permanence of death, but old enough to feel the crushing weight of the loss. Karen, who was younger than me, couldn't even comprehend what had happened. She kept asking where Mom and Dad were, and why everyone was crying. It broke my heart to hear her questions, knowing that the answers would shatter her world as they had mine. Losing our parents at such a young age was an unbearable tragedy. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under us, out of nowhere. The funeral was a blur of grief, with relatives gathering to help us say goodbye to our mom and dad. But as the initial shock wore off, a harsh reality began to set in. None of our relatives were willing to take us in. They all had their own lives, their own kids, their own challenges, and though they were there to support us in those immediate days, none of them could see themselves raising two young children. In the midst of all this, it was my grandmother who stepped up. She was the only one who didn't hesitate, the only one who, despite her own grief and the challenges ahead, agreed to take on the responsibility of raising both me and Karen. She didn't give up on us and agreed to fill the role of both mother and father, nurturing us, guiding us, and holding us together over the years. Financially, things were tight. Our parents hadn't left much behind. They didn't have a lot of savings. Whatever little they had managed to save was carefully set aside for our future, particularly for Karen's and my college funds. My mother had also left behind some jewelry, originally belonging to my grandmother, which was meant to be passed down to Karen and me when we got married. My grandmother kept the jewelry secure for us in a safe. Meanwhile, my grandmother, who was still working as a librarian at the local library, did what she could to make ends meet. Her job didn't pay much, but she was incredibly resourceful. Thankfully, she had inherited some money over the years after my grandfather and other members of her family had passed away, and that helped to cover the basics. But it wasn't enough. Sometimes, when things were particularly tough, she'd reach out to my mother's older brother, our uncle. He would send over whatever money he could spare to help pay for our groceries or other necessities. It was never a lot, but every little bit helped. Even with this assistance, life was far from easy. We were just scraping by, living day to day, stretching every dollar as far as it would go. Through all of this, I never felt the need to complain. I understood, even at a young age, just how much my grandmother was sacrificing to take care of us. She was doing everything in her power to ensure that we were fed, clothed, and had a semblance of normalcy in our lives, despite the immense loss we had all suffered. Her strength and resilience were something I admired deeply. She was holding our broken world together with sheer willpower, and I knew it wasn't easy for her. Karen, on the other hand, struggled much more to adapt. She was younger and had a harder time understanding the gravity of our situation. Even when we explained to her that our parents were gone, she would refuse to accept the truth. She often acted out, yelling and screaming whenever things didn't go her way. It was clearly her way of coping with the loss and the drastic changes in our lives, but it was also incredibly challenging for all of us. She didn't see the strength it took for our grandmother to get up every day and face the world, to provide for us with so little. Karen's complaints and frustrations got tougher and tougher as she became a teenager. Karen began to develop this crazy idea in her head that our parents had actually left behind a significant sum of money when they had passed away, and that our grandmother was somehow hiding it from us. It was a belief that seemed to fester in her mind, fueled by the anger and grief she had never fully processed. Karen became convinced that the reason we were living so frugally wasn't because we were scraping by, but because our grandmother was deliberately withholding the money to spend on herself. She first told me about this and I immediately shut it down. Unlike her, I actually remembered all the sacrifices my grandmother had to make over the years. I also pointed out to her that if this was the case, then our uncle and other relatives would have surely pointed it out, since they would not let our parents' money get taken from us. However, Karen refused to let this idea go. She began to watch our grandmother's every move with suspicion, interpreting every small expenditure as proof of her belief. If our grandmother bought a new dress or spent money on something for herself, Karen would see it as evidence that she was hiding our money from us. I would often tell her how obsessive and crazy she had become and would encourage her to seek counseling at school. One day, things came to a head. Karen, who had been harboring these thoughts for a long time, finally confronted our grandmother. Her voice was full of anger and accusation as she demanded to know why our grandmother was keeping this supposed fortune from us. She accused her of being selfish, of taking money that should have been used to make our lives better. She called her a thief and argued about how our parents would have been disappointed with Grandma. As you can guess, our grandmother was taken aback by the confrontation. She didn't even know that Karen believed in something so ridiculous. I could see the hurt in her eyes as Karen hurled these accusations at her. She had always been so patient with us, understanding that Karen's anger often came from a place of pain, but this was something different. This was an accusation that struck at the very core of everything she had done for us. Trying to keep things calm, our grandmother tried to explain the truth to Karen. She told her that there was no hidden fortune, that our parents had left behind very little money, and that every penny they did leave was carefully saved for our future, particularly for our college funds. She explained that the life we were living, as modest as it was the best she could provide given the circumstances. She reminded Karen that she had been working tirelessly to make sure we had what we needed, often putting her own needs aside. But Karen wasn't ready to listen. She was too caught up in her own anger and the false belief she had convinced herself was true. She couldn't see the sacrifice, the love, and the care that our grandmother had given us all these years. All she saw was what she believed to be a betrayal, and she couldn't let go of that. Watching this unfold was incredibly difficult for me. I understood Karen's pain, but I also saw the truth of our situation. Our grandmother had done nothing but give her all for us, and to see her questioned in this way was heartbreaking. In the end, I grew frustrated with Karen and couldn't hold back any longer. I snapped, my voice trembling with anger and hurt as I confronted Karen. I yelled at her, telling her that she was making our grandmother miserable over something she didn't even have proof of. I tried to make her see reason, to understand that our grandmother had done nothing but care for us all these years and that her baseless accusations were tearing our family apart. In my anger, I went further than I intended. I told Karen that if she couldn't stop this behavior, if she continued to lash out and make our grandmother's life difficult, then maybe she should leave. I suggested that if she was so convinced that our grandmother was hiding something from her, perhaps she should go live somewhere else and find out how difficult life can be. To my surprise, our grandmother, who had always been patient and gentle with Karen, agreed with me. She calmly told Karen that if she was so unhappy living with us, she would be willing to speak to our uncle about making other arrangements since she only wanted the best for us. She wasn't angry, but there was a firmness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. It was clear that she was deeply hurt by Karen's accusations, but also that she was at the end of her rope. Karen's reaction was immediate and intense. She didn't take our grandmother's offer as a sign of concern or love, but as further proof that we were trying to get rid of her now that, in her mind, the truth had been revealed. She accused us of conspiring against her. It was at this point that both my grandmother and I started to realize that this was more than just teenage rebellion or grief. Karen's behavior had become increasingly erratic and paranoid, and it was clear that she needed more help than just counseling. What had started as frustration and anger had turned into something much more concerning. Her accusations, her belief in this non-existent conspiracy, and her refusal to accept any reassurance or comfort were signs that something was seriously wrong. It was frightening to realize that Karen might be struggling with a deeper mental health issue, something that required professional intervention. The idea that my sister, who had already been through so much, might be suffering in ways we couldn't fully understand was terrifying. Our grandmother reached out to my uncle and both of them began looking into psychiatrists and more intensive treatment options for Karen. It wasn't long before they found a psychiatrist who took the time to understand Karen's behavior and the underlying issues driving it. After several evaluations, my sister was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. The diagnosis was a shock for us since we had no idea that Karen was going through so much. The psychiatrist prescribed a range of medications aimed at stabilizing her mood swings and helping her manage her depression. He also spent time educating us, especially our grandmother, on how to deal with Karen's mood swings, how to communicate with her, and how to support her without exacerbating condition. It was a lot to take in, but our grandmother, with her usual determination and love, embraced it all. She never wavered in her commitment to Karen, even after everything that had happened. Despite the diagnosis, Karen never once apologized for the hurtful accusations she had made towards Grandma. My grandmother, ever patient and forgiving, never held this against Karen. She forgave her completely and focused on providing the care and support Karen needed, without expecting anything in return. As the years went by, I wish I could say that Karen worked hard to improve and that she took steps to manage her condition and to build a life for herself. But the reality was more complicated, as she often resorted to harmful coping mechanisms. One of the most concerning behaviors was her tendency to steal, which seemed to be a way for her to cope with her mental illness, or perhaps an attempt to gain some control in her life. It wasn't uncommon for Grandma to notice small amounts of money disappearing. If she had a few dollars lying around, it would mysteriously vanish within hours. Karen would snoop around the house, always on the lookout for cash or valuables that she could take. This wasn't just a one-time issue, it was an ongoing problem that Grandma and I had to deal with regularly. The money Karen stole was often used for outings with her friends, partying, and other non-essential expenditures. It was disheartening to see her squander what she took on temporary pleasures, especially knowing how much effort Grandma put into managing her limited resources. It felt like a betrayal every time Karen stole money from her. However, despite the clear patterns of theft, Grandma's approach remained one of tolerance and patience. She continued to support Karen emotionally and financially. Grandma hoped that with time, Karen's behavior would change, or that she might find a way to manage her condition better. After high school, Karen decided that she was done with education. She didn't go to college, nor did she seem interested in pursuing higher education. Instead, with the money that our parents had left us, she took her share to move into a place of her own and started working at a local bakery, a job that required little of her in terms of qualifications but gave her a simple, steady routine. My grandmother never pressured Karen to do anything more. She understood that Karen was dealing with her own struggles, hence she let her do whatever she wanted. She never demanded that Karen follow a particular path or achieve specific goals. Instead, she focused on ensuring that Karen felt loved and supported, no matter what choices she made. Meanwhile, I went on to pursue a degree and eventually became a data analyst. Currently, I live on my own, and every month, I send money to both my grandmother and Karen. For my grandmother, it's something I do willingly and with a sense of gratitude. She has given so much of herself over the years, sacrificing her own comfort to make sure Karen and I were taken care of. Hence, helping her out financially is the least I can do, and it's something I'm glad to do for her. But when it comes to Karen, it's a different story. Since the bakery doesn't pay her enough and she has used up all of her share of our parents' savings, each month, she comes to me with a new request. She will demand money for inessential things like an air fryer, a hair color appointment, or a new gym membership. It's frustrating because I also help out for her rent, and then she keeps using me to fund her lifestyle, rather than trying to stand on her own 2 feet. The truth is, I could choose to cut Karen off financially. I could tell her that she needs to start managing on her own, to live within her means, and to stop relying on me to fund her wants. But I hesitate because I know what would happen if I did. If I stopped sending Karen money, she would turn to our grandmother. And that's something I can't bear to let happen. Our grandmother has already done more than enough for us. She raised us when no one else would, and she continued to support Karen through everything, even when it was clear that Karen wasn't putting in the effort to improve her situation. The last thing I want is for her to have to shoulder the burden of Karen's financial demands at this stage in her life. She deserves peace and stability, not more stress and worry about how to cover Karen's expenses. So, I've continued to send money to Karen begrudgingly each month, even though it frustrates me. I do it because I feel like I don't have another option. The resentment I feel for my sister has built up over time, as my sister has a never-ending list of demands. It feels like she doesn't even try to be self-sufficient, and that she's taking advantage of the situation because she knows I'll eventually give in, as I feel pity on her for her mental health struggles. Just a week ago, Karen called me repeatedly while I was at the office. She was at the grocery store, frantic and demanding that I send her money because her card had been declined. I was in the middle of work, and the last thing I needed was this kind of distraction. My first instinct was to hang up on her. I've been dealing with her constant requests for money for so long now that it's become exhausting. But before I could do that, she played her usual card. She threatened to call our grandmother if I didn't help her out. That threat hit me hard, as it always does. My sister knew exactly how to manipulate the situation, using our grandmother's vulnerability as leverage to get what she wanted from me. I transferred the money and asked her to not contact me again for money, at least for a couple of days. Karen simply scoffed at me and disconnected the call, rudely. This week marked a special occasion, our grandmother's 80th birthday. Some of her relatives had organized a small birthday party for close family members and friends. I was really looking forward to it, not just because it was a milestone birthday, but because it had been so long since I had seen my grandmother in person. We kept in touch regularly over the phone, but nothing compares to being there in person, especially for such an important day. When I arrived at the venue, I noticed Karen was already there, talking with some of our cousins. She barely acknowledged my presence, offering just a cursory glance before turning back to her conversation. It stung, but I decided to let it go for the sake of the day. My priority was to celebrate with our grandmother anyway, so I ignored her and went straight to give my grandmother a big hug. Seeing her smile and feeling her embrace after so long made everything else fade into the background. As the party went on, we sang happy birthday and gathered around to help her cut the cake. The room was filled with laughter and the warmth of family, all there to celebrate the incredible woman who had been such a pillar of strength for so many of us. When it was time for her to open presents, I watched as her face lit up with each thoughtful gift. It was heartwarming to see how much love and effort everyone had put into making her day special. When it came time for my gift, I was excited to tell her what I had planned. I had bought her a massage chair, a gift that I knew would make a real difference in her daily life. I'd noticed over the years how much her body ached, the toll that age and years of hard work had taken on her. A massage chair seemed like the perfect way to offer her some comfort and relief. I explained that it would be delivered and set up at her house in a few days. She was pleasantly surprised and genuinely touched, thanking me with a smile that showed how much it meant to her. After I shared my gift with Grandma and saw how happy it made her, Karen suddenly stood up and said it was her turn to give her a present. She started talking about how much Grandma had sacrificed for her over the years, how she could never fully repay her, but that she wanted to start with something meaningful. There was a dramatic pause before she pulled out an envelope and handed it to Grandma. When Grandma opened the envelope and revealed a $10,000 gift, the room fell silent for a moment before erupting into gasps of surprise and admiration. Everyone seemed stunned by Karen's gesture, and soon enough, the compliments started pouring in. People were calling Karen a sweetheart, praising her for her generosity and thoughtfulness. But as I stood there, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Just a week ago, Karen had been calling me from the grocery store, demanding money because her card had been declined. I had sent her money to cover her groceries, and now she was standing here, presenting a $10,000 gift to Grandma? The math didn't add up. How could she have saved up that kind of money when she'd been struggling to pay for her own basic needs every month? Knowing my sister, this wasn't an act of selfless generosity. Karen had always been focused on money. She was the one who constantly accused Grandma of hiding some non-existent inheritance, and she was always asking me for more. The idea that she would suddenly give away such a large sum of money out of the goodness of her heart didn't sit right with me. The whole situation felt off, like there was something fishy going on beneath the surface. There had to be more to this story. I decided not to say anything at that moment. It wasn't the time or place to call out Karen in front of everyone, especially not during Grandma's birthday celebration. Later, I returned to Grandma's place to stay with her for the next couple of days. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling from Karen's unexpected gift. I decided to ask Grandma if she had any idea where Karen might have gotten the $10,000. Grandma, as perceptive as ever, shared my skepticism. She knew Karen's financial situation well enough to understand that it was highly unlikely Karen had managed to save up such a substantial amount. Grandma suggested, perhaps somewhat hopeful, that Karen might have been saving the money I had been sending her each month. But Karen wasn't known for saving money, so this was highly unlikely. I spent the rest of the evening trying to piece things together, but nothing seemed to make sense. I couldn't figure out how Karen had come into such a large sum of money. Karen did have a history of questionable behavior. She had been involved in petty theft as a teenager. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility that she might have resorted to something shady to get this money. The idea that she could have stolen something or been involved in illicit activities crossed my mind. The next day, I decided to broach the topic with Grandma. I asked her if she had noticed anything missing from the house, anything that might suggest Karen had taken something. Grandma laughed it off, saying that there was nothing in the house worth stealing. Then I suggested to Grandma that we could check if any of her jewelry was missing. She paused and took a serious look at the situation. She agreed that it wouldn't hurt to check and let me help her open the safe where she kept her valuables. As she rummaged through the contents, her face grew more concerned until she finally confirmed that some of the jewelry, specifically pieces that had belonged to my mother, were indeed gone. I asked her to double-check just in case. Grandma was certain about it since she kept track of everything she had kept inside her safe. She was adamant that they were missing. I asked her if Karen could have taken them, as she came to visit her frequently, and Grandma agreed that it was a possibility. Grandma asked if I could confront Karen about it since she was the only one who could have gotten access to the safe and the jewelry. Feeling a mix of anger and urgency, I called Karen. I confronted her directly about the missing jewelry, and she initially tried to deflect and downplay the situation. She seemed almost nonchalant, as if it were no big deal. But as I pressed her and threatened to file a case on the missing jewelry, her attitude shifted, and she admitted that she had indeed taken the jewelry. She explained that since she had been visiting Grandma regularly, she had learned the safe's password and used it to take the items. I was furious and yelled at her. She argued that the jewelry had been rotting in the safe and that by selling it, she had put it to good use. She went on to admit that she had used the proceeds to fund her own needs and wants. The $10,000 she had given Grandma was part of that money, while the rest was spent on herself. The sheer audacity of her actions left me stunned. When I demanded that she return the money, since the jewelry belonged to both me and her, Karen refused. She defended her actions by accusing me of being selfish, claiming that I was trying to be greedy when I already had so much for myself. I reminded her that I had been sending her money every month even though she was an adult when she had no qualms about betraying me. Karen argued that I didn't understand the situation and insisted that she needed the money more than I did. Since then, I've been considering contacting the police about the matter. Ida, if I call the cops on my sister for stealing my mother's jewelry? Update 1. Thank you everyone for confirming what I already knew I should be doing in this situation. Just to clarify, my grandmother is also upset with Karen and has tried to contact her, but my sister is avoiding her calls since she already knows what she is going to say to her. It seems that Karen only gave money to Grandma, possibly out of guilt, hoping that by giving $10,000 to Grandma, she could somehow absolve herself of the wrongdoing. Update 2. Today, I went to my sister's house with the police. Her reaction when she opened the door was priceless. She looked absolutely terrified. I demanded she return my jewelry or give me my share of the money, threatening to have her arrested for theft if she didn't comply. Although she tried to negotiate, the presence of the police seemed to rattle her. She agreed to give me some of the money she had left from selling the jewelry and promised to pay the rest within a few days. I made it clear that if she didn't follow through, I would return to the police and have her arrested next time. I've also decided to send out an email to everyone warning them about Karen's behavior. I know she's likely to try and make me look like the villain while asking for their support. Grandma has already been telling people that the money she received for her birthday came from Karen stealing my mother's jewelry without consulting me or offering me my share. Suffice it to say, Karen won't have anyone left to turn to. I can't believe that after everything I did for her, she chose to betray me this way. Update 3. Hello everyone. I've finally received my full share of the money from the jewelry Karen sold. After involving the police and informing the rest of the family about her actions, she had no way out. Karen did contact me, furious, accusing me of forcing her to pay up. I reminded her that I had just as much right to the jewelry as she did. She begged me to let it go, but I stood firm. She was clearly trying to manipulate the situation and deflect responsibility yet again, but I didn't care any longer. In the end, she paid what she owed. It's incredibly sad that the entire situation has escalated to the point where Karen is now completely cut off from both me and Grandma after such a breach of trust. Karen is no longer welcome at my grandma's place as she is scared that she might keep stealing from her. I listened to some of your suggestions and plan on changing all her locks and installing cameras just for her own safety. Hopefully, in time, Karen will reflect on her actions and understand the impact her decision had on us. For now, I'm going to focus on healing and moving forward, both for myself and Grandma.